Amidst this year's cold tundra, we found many isekai and fantasy anime, and I went on to a quest to check each and every one that I could find. Unfortunately, some awful events happened on this quest, leading me to pass away and be reincarnated into a world where I have to talk about all of them. Luckily, there was a goddess there to send me into this new world with a special ability, and it's the ability to withstand mediocre isekai and fantasy stories. And so I begin my quest once more in this new world with plans to document my findings. This is the winter 2025 anime season. Let's begin our journey through this season with a bogus skill Fruitmaster. About that time, I became able to eat unlimited numbers of skill fruits that kill you. So have you ever watched One Piece? You know how in One Piece they got these fruits that give you special abilities? Well, this anime is basically fantasy adventure world with that concept. This guy eats fruit and gets the ability to eat more fruit, making him overpowered. And what do overpowered protagonists do? Sign up to the Adventurers Guild and slay a high-level enemy and freak people out. This anime seems quite gimmicky, and you can definitely tell where it got its inspiration from, and it follows a lot of tropes from this genre to a T, which is a little unlike possibly the greatest Alchemist of all time. This is probably the greatest anime talking about someone who could possibly be the greatest Alchemist of all time. Now, this anime does present itself in an interesting way, but something even more interesting is how I am noticing a bit of a trend. Welcome to Isekai 101. I am your host Wesley, and today I'll be talking about Isekai anime. If you are new to the Isekai genre, it's basically a person who goes to another world, generally a fantasy world. Now, this is generally a man familiar with video games or anime or things related to that. They usually meet a god or receive some kind of special attribute upon entering this new world. What's the deal with this trope? Well, I'm glad to tell you that I have no idea myself. There's a ton of it, and to find true gems in the rough is quite hard, especially when many follow the blueprint of super strong main character. This is generally why I think that the most well-regarded isekai has the main protagonist suffering a lot, or in the case of Konosuba, is just a complete comedy. In both instances, the main protagonist really is quite weak. But I feel like that's what makes it more interesting. Now, in possibly the greatest Alchemist of all time, the main protagonist didn't necessarily really want to be an adventurer or get super invested into combat because he is weak! My interest was piqued a little bit by the show due to an increased focus on alchemy rather than just being edgy or cool or slaying monsters, you know, stuff like that. So next we have Welcome to Japan Miss Elf. And honestly, I didn't know what to expect with this one, but it sure wasn't half isekai fantasy story and half Japanese touring dating sim. So basically, when this guy goes to sleep, he gets transported to a fantasy world and he ends up going to this dungeon with this elf girl and they get blasted by the fire of some dragon. But upon awakening, the elf girl that he got burnt down with is in his bed, and you guessed it, she has no clothes. You know, these really are only plots and cliches that you find in anime. I mean, no other medium has the creativity to create such a plot. Oh, also the main character, he's like a teenager in the fantasy world but a middle-aged man in reality. Sure, why not? Speaking of middle-aged men, here's a story about a middle-aged man in my daily life as a middle-aged shopper in another world. The ways that they manage to create innovative new titles is unparalleled, but I'm a bit tired of stories of the super strong guy. How about the guy who is basically an eBay reseller? So basically, this guy gets transported into another world, but he's got an item box. Whoa! But he is also able to purchase things from real-life online retailers to have delivered to his item box. So in a fantasy world, he begins his life as a merchant, selling stuff from real life. He also learns of the Spice Syndicate and their monopoly on spices, and that they're apparently quite dangerous to talk about. What is going on anymore? I don't know how they did it, but they really did make a fantasy anime about a merchant cutting profits from real-life goods, and they made it seem interesting. But with that said, I am far more interested in that Spice Syndicate and what's going on there. Are they like an underground gang who takes people who talk about spices out back? Do they go after spice sellers or something? Spices are quite integral to cooking, so does this mean that this universe has mediocre food? And it's their fault? As someone who likes food, this cannot be tolerated and the Spice Syndicate must be stopped. But what really needs to stop, or rather at least slow down for a bit, is the creativity of the fantasy isekai anime genre. At least I don't have to talk about that anime of that dude who got reincarnated into a vending machine in another world this season. Thank God that was last year. Back to basics. I left my A-rank party to help my former students reach the dungeon depths. This is a fantasy anime where this guy's previous party are awful people, so he leaves. He ends up running into his former students and they invite him to their new party. And he accepts the offer and they go into a dungeon. Turns out this guy's a busted support mage who can cast super rare magic buffs, but he's broke, so he mastered alchemy to make up for it. And oh man, he is making the main guy from possibly the greatest alchemist of all time have a run for his money. Really, like, if they had an alchemy off, who would win? guy who makes potions or guy who puts some mana in meals. Okay, I don't know about that second one, but it sounded interesting. Now, I'm getting a little bit tired about talking about fantasy anime, and that's okay, because luckily, this season has a Medalist. This isn't an isekai or a fantasy anime. Medalist is a beautiful anime about ice skating. And by beautiful, I mean, this guy, who seems a little bit strange, yeah, he chased a 5th grader in the first minute of the episode and looked really creepy doing it. But actually, if we ignore that, this anime has the potential to be a very good and heartwarming anime. The manga is very highly regarded, and the anime is living up to that. This guy is an ice skater who started a little bit too late to accomplish his goals, and he watches a young girl start to go through the same thing. But this time, he wants to prove that even starting late as a professional skater, you can still make it. So after the main character gets this young girl to go to a coach, which ended up happening to be him, it begins a journey of these two and their goals of becoming a medalist. I thought that this first episode was so heartwarming and that this is definitely going to be a really comfy anime to watch throughout this anime season. Also, I have to mention, the opening song done by Kenshi Inezu, it's pretty nice. However, I have a bit of a feeling that there is a lot more isekai fantasy anime out there, right? Yeah, so it turns out there's a lot more. So Mappa, an animation company well known for being a little bit hard on their animators, decided to create and write an anime about an overworked genius animator who dies on the job and gets reincarnated into the world of her favorite anime. So it's another fantasy isekai anime. But hear me out, this one is actually pretty good. So this is Zenshu, a story about this reincarnated animator who has to reanimate her favorite show to prevent what was thought to be an inescapable tragedy from happening. I think that this anime is particularly interesting. The concept is really neat, and the world is quite unique, and the animation is gorgeous and really fun. This is definitely an anime that I can see being talked about for quite a while, and it is among the top of my recommendations for this season. Also, an ending performed by So, making it one of my favorite ending themes for this anime season as well. It's very interesting to watch her learn more about her favorite anime and what an alternative reality could look like for it and unfold before her eyes. This anime is a lot of fun to watch for its humor, interesting writing, and to see how these tragedies will unfold in the face of a genius animator who can reanimate them. Again, Mappa never really misses in the work that they do, always delivering high quality content. I do worry for their animators just a little after watching this though, but there is a show this season that I am particularly worried for, and that show is Ubel Blatt. It had a really confusing first episode. Apparently the anime adaptation of this has been skipping a whole bunch of stuff from the original manga, making it a bit of a pacing mess, which unfortunately does show a bit. The anime itself seems pretty interesting, taking place in a darker themed environment where stowaways who don't pay high coin are persecuted and killed. I mean, literally, in the first few minutes of the anime, people were being hung. Now, despite this show being a bit confusing, the world is really interesting and the animation is fantastic. The main character seems pretty cool, but I still have no idea what's really going on. I think reading the synopsis has made more sense than watching the actual show so far. But hey, the great animation might just be a good enough reason to keep watching it throughout this season. Now, something that you should definitely check out this season is Flower and Asura. Now, this anime caught me by surprise. So when I was first reading up on Flower and Asura before watching it, I thought that it was just going to be a nerdy, boring anime. I mean, small island, an anime all about narrating and reciting literature, it's just not going to be for me. This is what I thought until I watched the first episode. And let me tell you, this first episode kinda blew me away. The story was super captivating and interesting, presenting us with a young girl struggling with self-worth issues. She likes reading literature and poems, and she really likes reciting them. After going to high school, she's pressed with having to find a club. She ended up getting scouted to join a broadcasting club, but she just has a bunch of anxiety about settling down on it. We get a look inside her head and what she's thinking about, and we eventually get presented with a scene that immediately sold me on this anime if it hadn't already done that. The animation, sound design, music, and especially voice acting was just so amazing here. After being blown away by how good this was, I decided to look into who made this, and it's no wonder it's so good. It's the same story writer as the Sound Euphonium series. This anime is kind of redefining what I had previously thought of its genre, so I can't recommend it more. So next up we have From Bureaucrat to Villainess, Dad's Been Reincarnated. Reading this title has struck fear into me in more ways than one. So this dad gets hit by a truck and is reincarnated into the world of a video game that he recently watched his daughter play. He was reincarnated into the villainess of the game, a bully noble with personality problems, but because he's a dad, he doesn't really do a good job at being a bad person, so everyone just kinda ends up liking him, including the main protagonist. He was reincarnated into the game as a side character, but this game is a dating sim where the main character or player has all of these men to choose from. However, due to the villainess being such a perfect and sweet upstanding noble, it doesn't seem to pan out that way. As a result, it's made for a bunch of funny moments, but it has also left me with a question, so bear with me here for a moment. If this man's daughter is playing the game as the protagonist, and her dad is the Villainess who the protagonist falls in love with, does this mean that the man's daughter is falling in love with her dad? This is a very scary line to go down, so I'm going to imagine that the protagonist is a separate entity entirely. Anime becomes a lot more controversial when you start thinking about it, so I am no longer going to think. Next up, Sakamoto Days. This anime is awesome. It's an action comedy about the world's greatest assassin and his retirement. He ends up having a family and begins running a convenience store with them, but the dark world of being a hitman comes back to him after many years. Now, it's the Sakamoto family policy to not kill anyone. However, he will participate in activities to protect his family from these hitmen, such as knocking them out. Being a changed and retired man, people expect him to be an easy target. But it turns out he hasn't lost his touch as one of the greatest hitmen of all time. This show is full of tons of fun moments with excellent humor, great characters, and a whole lot of good and fun action to keep you hooked. Now, this is definitely a highlight of the season. You gotta check this out. I've heard tons of good stuff about the manga, and this is a banger. Now, this is an interesting anime. We have Ameku MD Doctor Detective. This anime follows a Doctor Detective girl who, for some reason, really wants to watch Jurassic Park. She is capable of very quickly resolving cases of patients who would otherwise need much longer to diagnose. She's regarded as some kind of genius doctor, and apparently it turns out doctors here help investigators solve complicated cases. And she happens to like those complicated cases. So a patient comes into the hospital that she works at. This guy's missing a leg and his blood is blue. So she begins investigating, and comes to the conclusion that it must have been a dinosaur. Also, this takes place in the middle of Tokyo. Now, I am in no position to question her work as a doctor or a detective. I literally do not have a job myself. But I don't think this makes sense. It's a very interesting anime to watch throughout the season, and especially if you're into more episodic little mysteries with a little bit of humor, you'll like this. Next up, I'm getting married to a girl I hate in my class. Not me, this guy. So it is as the name implies. These two hate each other, but they're being forced to marry each other by their grandparents. Now, you may be wondering, how would you force people to marry? Well, it's simple. Blackmail! So what kind of blackmail would force two people to get married? Well, you see, their grandparents are wealthy. They made an agreement that, if their grandchildren don't get married, they would give their company to a random dog, which would ruin the main character's dreams and kind of ruin their family business's lineage. Now, I'll be honest, I would love to see an anime about a dog running a wealthy and successful company, but unfortunately, all we got was marriage. Also, I do have to mention, the main character and his cousin, they're a little bit too close. It's a little weird, just a little bit. While a funny rom-com, this anime is kind of tropey, but if it does sound interesting to you, you'll probably like it. So now we have Honey Lemon Soda, and Honey Lemon Soda is interesting. It follows typical bullied shoujo tropes. Basically, this girl gets bullied but looks up to a guy who saved her from being bullied that one time. You can probably guess the rest. Now, I'll be honest, I'm not a huge fan of this genre, so I don't have a whole lot to say for this one, other than that the first episode was pretty interesting, and I'm quite curious to see how the story of this girl getting the strength to stand up for herself develops. Now, this is definitely not for me, but I've heard good stuff about the manga, so hey, I just have bad opinions, I guess. Speaking of bad opinions, I liked watching Headhunted to Another World from Salaryman to Big 4. This is a fantasy isekai anime following the salaryman who constantly had to work abroad in various countries. The Demon King carefully reviews his work history and determines that due to his experience working abroad, he would be a perfect candidate to work abroad in another world for the Demon King's army. This is a fantasy comedy, and it's been pretty interesting to see how this normal guy interacts and handles his new job. It's a pretty interesting anime. This guy negotiates with a bunch of dudes, does a whole lot of business stuff, but for the Demon King's army, and there's a lot of humor to it, there's a lot of funny interactions, there's a lot of stuff going on here. However, I thought that the next anime, I May Be a Guild Receptionist, but I'll solo any boss to clock out on time, was a little bit more funny. Now, this is a worker who takes their job seriously. This story follows a guild receptionist who is being overworked. She wants time to herself, but she has to work overtime due to the sheer amount of outgoing big quests. So, determined to go home on time, she goes out and completes high-ranking quests herself to reduce her workload at the guild. It's a fantasy anime with a bunch of humor, and if you're a fan of anime like Bofuri, I could see you enjoying the series. Now, forgive me for saying this, but maybe the life of a guild receptionist is not for her if it makes her so upset. I get it though, they have good benefits like that previously mentioned Demon King had, but hear me out. Become a golfer like the protagonist of Sorairo Utility. This is probably one of my favorite anime of the season so far, which kinda surprised me. This is a sports comedy slice of life anime featuring this girl whose favorite gacha game shut down, leaving her with one question. What does she do with her life now? She wants to find one activity that she can be the protagonist of, so she tries a wide variety of activities, sucking at all of them. She eventually, by chance, ends up trying golf, where she ends up having a really good time. But she still sucked, but she ended up deciding that she wants to keep practicing. Throughout her struggles, she compares a lot of ideas and concepts to gacha games, like leveling up skills, making this a really fun anime to watch. Accompanied by a fantastic opening done by Masayoshi Oishi from OXT featuring Airi Suzuki. A really fun art style, great characters, this anime has shocked me and it's probably been one of the most fun to watch for me this season. I'm usually not big into sports anime, but somehow golf anime are 2 for 2. First with the insane story that is Birdie Wing where they got involved in some golf mafia and die or something, and now with Sorairo Utility. I highly recommend checking this anime out. Now, I have watched a lot of fantasy, isekai, and all this kind of stuff this season, but this stood out to me. An anime called Even Given the Worthless Appraiser class, I'm actually the strongest. So this guy is an appraiser for a party of nobles who stumble into a trap and literally feed him to the wolves. His 2 party members were awful people who would abuse him and literally leave him to die. Now, this anime started surprisingly dark. I mean, you compare this to other anime with similar titles and it's a fantasy anime where the guy is just overpowered. This one had a lot more substance to it. It was well put together, giving me a good understanding of the position that this guy was in, and honestly, for anime of this genre, this is probably building up to be one of the highlights of the season. Now, the rest of the anime that I have to talk about are sequels to things that have already released, anime that I don't have access to, anime that I'm not super interested in, but generally, these are all things that I've seen at least the trailers for. First, we have Medaka Kuroiwa is impervious to my charms. Yeah, if this is appealing to you, then you should check this anime out. Next is I'm Living with the NEET Kunoichi. Now this just looks like Umaru-chan with more mental concerns. There's also Miku. She can't sing anymore. Miku, no. Oh, breaking news. Apparently it's an alternate universe Miku or something? I don't know how the colorful stage, whatever this is universe works, man, but apparently they got a bunch of Mikus. Finally, we have our list of major sequels for this season. First, starting off with Bang Dream Ave Mujica. Ave Mujica. What? How do I pronounce this? I'll check out this series one day because I like bands. So, quick editor's note. I decided to look more into, I'm not even gonna try pronouncing it. Turns out this anime has a lot of seasons, so maybe I won't watch it. I've liked a lot of rock band anime. I mean, Bocchi the Rock was fantastic, K-On! Was great, Girls Band Cry was amazing, so I'll definitely try to make it worth my time to watch this. Hey, quick editor's note, I know, second one already. Should I watch this? I'm really considering it. If you've seen this, let me know if it's worth watching all of it, please. Next, there's Solo Leveling Season 2, which has been great so far. Great animation, great music, awesome show, and hey, the guy's still solo leveling. There's also the Apothecary Diaries Season 2, Dr. Stone's Science Future, the 100 Girlfriends Who Really, Really, Really Love You Season 2, alright, had to count the amount of reallys there, My Happy Marriage Season 2, Toilet Bound Hanako-kun Season 2, Blue Exorcist The Blue Knight Saga, and resuming, we have ReZero Season 3 Part 2 and Danmachi Season 5 Part 2, which those are both things that I've watched, and I mean, hey, they've been pretty good so far. And that is the grand majority of things airing this season. I have reached the summit, the end of my quest to watch all of the major anime this season. And my time on this quest has made me realize something. I am losing my mind. What sane person takes the task of trying to watch 90% of anime in a certain season? Oh, So it's not just me. Jokes aside, this was a blast, and getting to try out a whole bunch of new anime has led me to find shows that I otherwise wouldn't have had watched. I hope that this video has gotten you interested in at least one of the anime that I spoke of. In general, I really liked watching all of the anime that I tried this season, and I hope that something I said has gotten you interested in checking one of them out yourself. I'm quite interested to hear what you might watch this anime season, so leave a comment and please let me know. Now, this video took a lot of work to put together, so if you liked this video, I'd really appreciate it if you checked out my other content or checked out any of my main channel videos. Also, if there's someone else you think might enjoy it themselves, please share it to them. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.